camera, it works.
Camera's
It's
got that
just-
little tricky thing.
Yeah, it's recording. Yeah, okay, it's good.
All right. So first, how did you find out about what was going on with Grandmere, and how did you get involved with the movement to kind of put an end to it?
Okay, if you're alive and running a temperature of about 90 degrees, you knew about Grandmere because it was in the papers every day. I knew about Grandmere, and I lived 250 miles away. In 1970, before I got here, Grandmere was in the papers all over because it was the environmental crisis, and here was the dunes under threat of being developed by Mr. Businessman, and it was just that time of year, or that time in our history, where people were getting fed up with Mr. Businessman, who had theoretically done business, but had in reality wrecked pretty much of our ecosystem, and it still continues pretty well, but at least now we have them on a leash. But here they were about to change the dunes into a playground, into a place that they could attract people from Chicago and so forth. And even worse, they wanted to sell the sand to the foundries because, well, you probably don't have any idea what sand was used for, so I will tell you. Sand was used for making iron, cast iron, from molten iron. Let's see. Oh, well, you know, have you ever done anything with plaster of Paris? You know, where you pour it into a mold, and then, you know, well, to make car engines, they do the same thing. But of course, they can't. They heat iron until it's red hot and liquid, and you can't pour that into a little rubber mold because it'll burn the rubber mold. So you have to find some vessel that won't burn up, and sand won't burn up. And so they glue it together with a resin made of glass, which doesn't burn very easily either. And then they shape a die or a cast from that, like of a piston, for instance, or a brake drum or something like that. And then they pour iron in it, and then once it's settled, bang, they hit the sand and it falls apart, and they throw it out the door. And so that takes up a lot of sand, and that's what they were going to use and have used for making molten parts into steel parts for a long, long time. In fact, when you go down I-94 and you go down by Bridgman, once you go by Bridgman, there they've taken all the dunes on either side and they've used them in factories for making car parts. When you could as well have taken sand inland and sorted it out so you have all the same size, but they chose to do that. And so now we have a dismal death row of dismembered dunes going right through there. Just notice Bridgman, anytime you go by there, you can see the shadows of the great dunes, but a little further back it's just flattened out. And that's what they wanted to do to our dunes, and we had said we don't want any part of that. We want the dunes left where they are, because they're beautiful. And right by Grandmere, you've got those 2, 3 beautiful lakes, maybe some more, formed through wonderful geological systems. They are sort of the Mona Lisa of the natural world. And here, people that didn't understand even the slightest idea of what kind of beautiful geologic forces came to be since the glacial time, and made those beautiful dunes, the beautiful lakes, and Lake Michigan, all put together for our enjoyment, and our wonderful businessmen were saying, no, that's included in drugs and all the way, and they couldn't understand why that shouldn't be done. And so there's a lot of us that were enlightened people that understood a little bit more about people and what their needs are, whether their needs are for wide open spaces some places, and their need is to look at beautiful landscapes like Lake Michigan and that from the top of the sand dunes. And we just need those things to feel good about the out of doors and ourselves. And so we have to save them, otherwise we'll live in places like China. Have you ever been to China? It's polluted, they either farm or industrialize everything right up to the highways. They grow cabbage in the highways of the highways. And when you get towards big cities, they have interstates now. But when we approached big cities and the interstates were there were people all over the place in the green shoulders. We said, what is this, some kind is this a rebellion or what? I said, no, it's the weekend. And this is the only place people can find green areas, is on the interstate byways, the shoulders and now think of what a sad existence you had if you wanted to have a picnic someplace and the only place you could find that was green and there was a breeze, and the breeze was caused by trucks going by. The only place you could find that is on the interstate at 94. Just go and hop over the fence and spread your blanket and there's your picnic. And otherwise, all the places are used up. And there's no such thing as a park or even an open green spot. There's no such place. And it's awful. It's terrible. And we don't want to be that way. And so we want to have that as open spaces. And that's what we told them. And they didn't see our ways, and so we had to take it to court and do all kinds of things. What was the question? How did I find out about it? Is that the
Yes.
question? I read about it in the paper. It's a good answer. Okay, next question.
How did you said that everybody knew about it because everybody was reading it in the paper. How did everyone who opposed it get together and decide that they were going to do something about it and meet up? Like, how did you raise awareness?
How did everybody get together? Well, there were some fine people. I just got here in the 1970s. This had actually started in 1965 or so. And there were conservationists that didn't want it, and so they got together with other people that they knew and said, let's not have that anymore. So they wrote it in the paper and said, everybody that wants to be against this, let's meet at this guy's house. So that's the way it started. And then when I got here, I said that anybody that wants to can meet at this nature center. So there are a lot of people that didn't want that kind of thing going on. And so that's the way people just, if people were going to do something stupid like that, you guys would probably rebel against it. And we would call each other up and say, hey, this is dumb, we can't have this. And so that's the way it started. People that had great spirits and liked the outdoors naturally got together to oppose it.
Could you explain to us a little bit about the legal processes and stuff that you guys went through to oppose
absolutely.
it?
We fought it tooth and nail. It was Manly Sand Mining Company, and they were stationed right over by Stevensville, and that's what they wanted to do, is mine sand. And so, but they have to get a permit now through the Department of Natural Resources. We talked to senators and to congressmen, and we said, hey, you guys got to help us out. We elected you, now we don't want the sand mining going on. And so they made a law, Public Sand Law 222, and it says you just can't go buying sand from somebody and truck it off. You have to get a permit from the government to do that and give the people a chance to oppose it. And so that's what we did, and so that's when we opposed it, when they made a permit. And so we rallied to the cause, and we raised lots of money, and we hired good lawyers, and we then told them, you can't do that. So they said, okay, we'll write another one. And they could write as many permits as possible as they could, and every one of them we would have to get lawyers and attack it and beat it down. And so we were running out of money, but they weren't. And so they just changed it a little bit and put it in there. And finally we got a lawyer who didn't like it either, and he worked for nothing for us. So that was great. Now we were set. And finally, after about 5 years of doing this, and Mr. Manley, somebody must have run over his head as a youngster or something, because he was just, he would just be, I mine sand. That's what I do. I'm a money grubber, and I like money, and I mine sand to get it. And that folks, that's the way it is. Somebody's got to mine sand. If you like automobiles, you got to have engines. You can't make engines unless you have sand to make the block. I said, well, you can get it inland, and you can shake it, strain it, get the right kind of sand size that you want. And he said, that costs too much money. I said, well, Ford Motor Company is not doing business with anybody unless they get sand from inland sources. Don't take it from the beautiful sand dunes of Michigan. Do you realize that we have the greatest accumulation of freshwater dunes in the world? This is no two-bit thing. In the world we have. And they've made national parks and state parks out of it. And if you can't realize the greatness of it, well then, I don't know where it goes. So he sold to British Aggregates, which is a European company, and they bought it, and they tried to mine sand too, and we opposed them the same way. And they came and talked to us and said, what's the matter? Why don't you want us to mine sand? And we told them why we didn't want them to mine sand, because the sand dunes are beautiful, and it's the greatest accumulation of freshwater dunes in the world, and that's worth something. And they said, we're going to think about that. And so they went and thought about that, and they came back, and we couldn't believe it. They had a meeting with us at the Grand Museum, and they said, and they had a beautiful English accent, and quite proud and proper. And the main guy, Mr. O'Leary, he said, we have investigated the whole thing, and you know what? He said, we agree with you. We shouldn't be mining that. But we stuck $4 million in this thing, and we'd like our $4 million back. Can we at least mine a little bit of the sand so we get our $4 million back? You can even tell us where you want it to be mined, and we get that, and we'll sell the rest at fair market value. And we said, great, we'll do it. But we don't want you to start mining, or we don't want you to all of a sudden, when we mine that, all of a sudden when you're almost done, then to make a permit for that. And they said, no, we won't. But we had to get just the right language, and it took us 2 years to get this agreement, so that we had to promise that we wouldn't stop them from mining once they made the agreement, and then say, oh, we can't mine there either. And we had to let them do it. But we didn't want them to do any more than that. And so it finally came about that we got it. It's 64 pages of an agreement that they'll only mine that much. And we finally got that, and it was signed, and we were so happy to see some people that actually agreed with us. We thought, well, what's the matter with these people? Can't they see that we are right and they are wrong? But they couldn't, and they just said, hey, we just mine sand. It's just like, one guy put up for an argument that some people like stamps, some people like art, some people like sand dunes. I like money, and that's why we're going to mine this thing. And we said, but that's not right. And we said, no, that's my attitude. And so there are people that will just do anything for money, And don't be one of those people when you grow up. You have to have a big mind and think of all the consequences of what you're doing for all the people that are coming behind you. And then when you have any doubts about being right or wrong, take a trip to China, and then you'll see that that's not what we want to look like. Polluted air, polluted water. We were going down the loft, forget the name. You wouldn't know anything. A big river that they just dammed up, and we took a 4-day trip, and in that 4 days we saw 6 bodies just floating by, and they just died somewhere. Nobody cared. One floating by. That was it. Can you imagine here if somebody saw a body floating down the St. Joe River or something? Oh, it would be, would be a terrible thing. And that's correct. It's not a correct thing if you see a body and say, oh, it was another body, That means you don't care much about each other, or you don't care much about your fellow humans. But we do, and so you have to think big about what's right and how you're going to live your life and let other people live their life. So before you do something, you should always think of the consequences, and they should think about what is this going to look like if we take all the sand away from here instead of having big rolling sand dunes. Now it'll be flat and ugly, and we make a lot of money. But is it the right way to do it? And it's not. And so you got to fight for what you believe in. If you're a good thinker, then you probably will think correctly. But go to school and learn lots of stuff. Learn all kinds of things, and then you'll be able to make good decisions. But that's the way we won it. We ran it through the courts, but thank goodness that smart people bought away from dumb people.
Yeah.
And so that was the big thing. We kept at it, not knowing where we were going to go, because